There's something you've believed for a long time, that you are broken, not just tired, not just struggling, but fundamentally flawed. You might not say it out loud, but it echoes in the background of your mind. There's something wrong with me. That voice didn't come from nowhere. It was planted by experiences that bruised you, by people who couldn't hold your truth, by systems that taught you, if you suffer, you must be broken. But what if the truth is the opposite? What if you were never broken? You just forgot you were whole. Carl Jung believed healing didn't come from becoming something new, but from remembering who you already are. The self, undamaged, untouched, buried beneath the noise of life. Think about it. When a child cries, we don't say they're broken. We say they're hurt. There's a difference. Brokenness implies finality, like something essential has been lost. But you haven't lost yourself. You've just gotten so far from your center that it feels like absence. You've mistaken numbness for emptiness, shame for truth, silence for peace. And in that confusion, you started editing your soul. You stopped trusting your own feelings. You stopped believing in your own goodness. You started chasing healing like a product, something outside yourself. Therapies, books, affirmations, all helpful, but none of them can give you what you already are, because healing is not a journey forward. It's a return to the self that never needed fixing, only remembering. They taught you to see yourself in fragments, to divide your emotions into categories, good and bad, to split your behavior into acceptable and too much, to look at your life through the lens of productivity, performance, and politeness. And when you didn't fit the mold, when your soul didn't sit quietly in the lines they drew, they didn't ask what hurt you. They asked what was wrong with you. So you learned to ask the same question. You turned your gaze inward, but not with compassion, with judgment. Every emotion became suspect. Every thought needed fixing. Every need felt like a weakness. And when your heart cried out, not in language, but in symptoms, in exhaustion, in isolation, in tension that never went away, you didn't ask it what it needed. You asked it to be quiet, because that's what you were taught. Don't feel too much. Don't want too deeply. Don't speak unless it's neat, tidy, and easily digestible. Carl Jung once said, "We meet ourselves time and again in 1,000 disguises on the path of life. But what happens when every disguise is a version of you pretending to be okay? You don't recognize yourself anymore. You become a ghost of your own life, functioning, smiling, replying, posting. But inside, a quiet question lingers. What happened to me? Not in a dramatic, collapsed way, but in a subtle, persistent ache, like something's missing, but you can't remember what it was. That missing isn't a broken part. It's a forgotten wholeness, a connection to your inner voice, the one that existed before you learned to be pleasing, polite, or perfect. Because healing isn't about reaching some final version of yourself. It's about coming back to the version that existed before the world told you who to be. You were once a child who trusted their joy, who cried without shame, who danced without asking for permission. That child still lives inside you, not as something naive, but as something pure. And every time you ignore your body, every time you suppress your anger, every time you laugh off your pain, you bury that child a little deeper. But they're not gone. They're waiting not for your improvement, but for your return. Return isn't loud. It doesn't happen all at once. It's quiet, subtle, like remembering a song you forgot you loved, a scent that reminds you of home, a word that breaks the silence in your chest. And maybe, just maybe, This moment right now is the first note, the first breath back into being. There's a moment, not dramatic, not cinematic, but quiet, when something begins to shift. You wake up one morning and you don't feel like running, not because you're healed, but because you're tired, tired of chasing versions of yourself that never feel like home. You look around at the rituals you've built, the planner full of tasks, the bookshelf full of answers, the calendar full of commitments, and you wonder, when did healing become another way to stay distracted? No one told you that self-improvement, when driven by self-rejection, becomes another form of self-abandonment. You start to notice how often you say, "I'm fine," how often you rush to help others while ignoring the ache in your own chest, how often you minimize your pain because someone else has it worse. You start to see how the patterns you thought were noble were actually survival. Hyper-independence wasn't strength, it was fear. People-pleasing wasn't kindness, it was a strategy. Overthinking wasn't intelligence, it was anxiety in a costume. And now those costumes feel heavy, not wrong, just unnecessary, because beneath them, you're still there, not perfect, not polished, but present. Carl Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But who is that? Not the version that gets the most likes, not the one who performs peace, but the one who holds complexity without shame, the one who can be whole and still wounded, joyful and grieving, clear and confused, the one who remembers that healing isn't a finish line, it's a relationship, a return, a reckoning. You begin to understand that you never needed fixing. You needed permission to pause, to not have the answers, to cry without explanation, to rest without guilt. And in that permission, space opens, a space where you no longer ask, "What's wrong with me?" but instead whisper, "What happened to me? What did I carry? What did I bury? And most importantly, what am I ready to reclaim?" Not because you're starting over, but because you're starting to remember. Healing doesn't begin with fixing. It begins with remembering. Remembering the parts of you that the world asked you to forget. You weren't born afraid to feel. You learned it. You weren't born ashamed of your body, your voice, your needs. Someone taught you. And because you were young, sensitive, and open, you believed them. You thought, if I stay quiet, they'll stay. If I smile, they won't be mad. If I try harder, maybe I'll be enough. And so the performance began. You became good at it. So good that you forgot it was a performance. You forgot where the act ended and the truth began. Until one day, you realize you're surrounded by people who don't really know you. You're praised for a version of yourself that isn't even you. You're achieving, succeeding, keeping it all together. And still, you feel hollow. Because deep down, a truth has been growing in silence. You miss yourself. Not the old self, not the before the trauma self, but the authentic self, the one who knew who they were before they were edited. Carl Jung said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." And he was right. To reclaim the forgotten self means you'll have to feel everything you numbed. You'll have to grieve the years you spent pretending. You'll have to sit in rooms where no one claps and still choose not to perform. It's not glamorous. It's not aesthetic. It's raw, messy, necessary. You begin by noticing how you abandon yourself in conversations, how you rush to make others comfortable while ignoring your own discomfort, how you apologize for your needs as if they're burdens, and then you stop, not all at once, but slowly, deliberately. You start asking yourself before asking others. You stop explaining your boundaries like they need justification. You stop shrinking when someone misunderstands you, because you understand yourself now, and that is enough. This is the turning point, where you move from survival to sovereignty, where healing becomes less about returning to how things were and more about becoming who you were always meant to be, before the world asked you to be smaller. You begin to trust that wholeness isn't perfection, it's integrity, the courage to hold all of who you are, the brave, the broken, the bold, the tender, in one breath, without guilt, without shame, without apology. You were never too much. They were too limited to hold your magnitude. Now, you hold it. You hold you. And maybe for the first time, that's enough. You don't wake up powerful. You wake up honest. And that honesty, raw, sacred, and uncomfortable, is what gives birth to real power. Not the kind that dominates rooms, not the kind that performs certainty, but the kind that moves silently through your spine when you decide, I will no longer betray myself to belong. That's where it begins. Carl Jung believed that what we reject in ourselves doesn't disappear. It grows in the dark, unconscious, untamed, and it waits, not to destroy us, but to return us to ourselves. The power you thought you lacked, it's not missing, it's hiding. Behind every yes you meant to say no, behind every smile you wore while silently aching, behind every time you bit your tongue to be accepted, it lives there, in your silence, in your boundaries, in your desires that you buried because they were too inconvenient for the world. You were not powerless. You were conditioned to doubt your own strength. So what does it look like to reclaim it? It looks like speaking without rehearsing, resting without earning it, saying no without writing a thesis to justify it. It's walking into a room and not scanning for approval. It's standing in front of a mirror and not flinching. It's feeling anger and not confusing it with danger, because power doesn't always look like fire. Sometimes it looks like stillness, like choosing not to respond to chaos, like pausing when everything inside you says, prove yourself. It's presence, embodied, unshaken. This power doesn't shout, it doesn't compete, it simply is, because you no longer seek to be seen. You know who you are, and that knowing, that is freedom. Freedom from the game of pretending, freedom from the illusion of not enoughness, freedom from the guilt of outgrowing who you were taught to be. And once you taste that freedom, you stop apologizing for your evolution. You don't ask for permission to heal. You don't wait for validation to feel whole. You don't trade your fire for false peace. You rise, not above others, but within yourself. You've come a long way, not by changing who you are, but by remembering who you've always been. And now you stand at a quiet edge. There's no applause, no spotlight, just a choice. Do you go back to the version of you that felt safer in silence, or do you walk toward the life where all of you is welcome? This is not a question of confidence, it's a question of courage. Because to live whole, to live unedited, means you will be misunderstood. You will be too much for some, too deep, too soft, too real. But you'll never be too much for yourself again. And that's where freedom begins. Carl Jung once said, your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens. So you begin awakening. You stop chasing gurus. You stop searching for external permission. You stop outsourcing your healing to people who've never met your pain. You return to the body that always carried the truth, to the breath that anchors you to now, to the intuition that whispers what logic can't explain. You begin again, not because you're broken, but because you're ready to rebuild a life that doesn't require self-abandonment. ready to create relationships that don't ask you to shrink, ready to rest without earning it, ready to feel without fear. And when doubt creeps in, because it will, you'll have something you didn't have before, a center, a place inside you that isn't confused by chaos, that knows the difference between who you are and who you were trained to be. This isn't just healing. This is remembering. This is reclaiming. This is returning. And with every breath, with every choice to honor yourself instead of performing, you rewrite the story, not with noise, not with perfection, but with truth. And truth, real truth, doesn't need to convince anyone. It just needs you to live it. You were never broken. You just forgot you were whole. Now you remember. Now you begin. And you carry that power not like a sword, but like a center, grounded, silent, unshakable. You don't need to explain it. You don't need to prove it. You just walk with it. Because now you remember.